That's mindfulness. It's present. But even Buddhism says you don't have to focus on the present moment. You need to focus the mind on something.
It's so important to be mindful of what have people gone through, because you might be forcing someone into something where close your eyes, do a body scan. But if they've been through trauma, they've been through childhood sexual abuse, or something has gone on in their life, and you're getting them to do something here, are we really holding this space for them to get what they need, or are we re-traumatizing them?
You seek out, if you had an abusive parent, you seek it out in a partner because it's what you understand. It's what you know how to navigate. You actually feel safer with somebody who treats you badly because you know what to do in the situation.
Hi, so thank you so much for coming to Therapised. How are you, first of all, today?
I am great. I am very warm. I'm in a really warm room where there's a massive window to my left that is baking. It's quite nice. I haven't felt heat, proper heat in a while, so I'm enjoying it, but I'm slightly sweaty.
Yeah.
But apart from
We're
that,
not going to complain about the heat. We're
no.
not going to complain about it. And are you ready to be therapized?
I absolutely am. I can't wait.
Yeah. And when we talk about like therapy, first of all, is that something that is new to you? Is that something that, have you ever experienced therapy?
I've been in therapy for about 15 years. So,
and
yeah.
If you could put it into one sentence, what would you say is your biggest learning, your biggest lesson from therapy?
I think the biggest lesson I got was from a guy called Dr. Tony Bates, who said, he called the 2 hours of suffering, the 2 arrows of suffering. The Buddha calls them the 2 arrows. The first arrow is the inevitable stuff. You're all going to feel like grief and relationship issues and stress. And the second arrow is the one that we fire at ourselves. Like, I should have done this. I should have spent more time with them. I could have done this. So it's that second arrow. Tony would always say, don't fire that one. The first one is painful enough.
Yeah.
And that really helps.
Do you feel like when you're thinking of I should have, that's something that a lot of people will struggle with, is they'll do something and then afterwards they'll beat themselves up. I should have done it like this, or I should have done it like this. Is that something that you've struggled with through your career and through your life?
It's actually visceral for me. I sometimes could be lying down and I'll think of something that I did and I would actually I'd almost miss a breath and it would come out my body. And I don't know why that is. Like when I was younger, like I always say to people, if camera phones existed when I was a teenager, I wouldn't have a career. Like I was bold. Like being a teenager, you're kind of meant to find your feet a little bit. You're meant to rebel slightly. Nobody was documenting my failures, and there were many. So I often think back and I'm like, oh my God, imagine they were. Like, and so I always say that to young people: don't document your mates' failures, please don't. It might look fun and it might be a bit of crack, but for me, I do think about things that I've done in the past, and I shudder sometimes. It's physical for me.
Yeah. And even when we say like, okay, when we're thinking and I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done this. And sometimes I think when we do reflect back, we look at the things that we have been through and we think, okay, that's happened. What's my learning from this? Or what am I taking away from this? But sometimes we can get stuck. Yeah. We can get stuck in situations and we don't forgive ourselves. We just keep shaming ourselves and telling ourselves off. How do you deal with situations like that when you get stuck in spaces where it's like, I should never have done that, and you're just shaming yourself?
It's interesting when I look at my own kind of headspace. I'm not a huge ruminator. I can move on from things. I kind of shame is. I always say Ireland weaponized shame. If you want to know how shame's used, come to Ireland. We were brilliant at it. Like the Catholic Church, the state, shame was used as a weapon in Ireland for so many years. So we're very good at using it on ourselves as well. But and people don't realize that about Irish people. They think they're just these good fun, always happy. They're not. They're just being shamed so much. So shame is something I've learned about and been able to deal with, and something I can move on. I'm more of I worry about other people so much that it can utterly consume me. So I'm more of a forward-thinking, anxious, dribbling mess than I am a ruminating, shameful kind of regret person.
So when you say people and you say it's people that I'm worried, is it what people think? Is it what people might do? What is it about people that you're worried about?
It's people I love. It's actually people close to me. I worry about people I love. I just wonder what, these ideas, what life would be without them and how you would cope with that and what you do, and I think that is something that I don't want to lose. That kind of deep empathy I have for the people I love is something I very much hold close to my heart, but it can be consuming. But I do, like everybody, anyone who says they have zero interests in or worry about what other people think of them. Irving Goffman said, he calls it the presentation of everyday self. He said that, like, we have our front stage person, and then we
Yeah.
have our backstage person, who's the person
Mm.
who is really what you are. And it's somewhere in the middle we got to be. You know, you got to present yourself to society, but you got to bring your values and your morals to that table as well. And
You've literally just described the high functioning anxiety. It's like we have this side of us that we show, and then we've got the side that's like really what's going on. And it's like we need to find ourselves in the middle. And what that is about is how do we show up authentically, but also not feeling that we need to show everything. It's finding the right balance in, okay, with certain people, what do I want to show? What do I want to share? But when you're speaking about like this real sadness of my loved ones, I think that's a real thing. It's like addressing the elephant sometimes is this is a real life thing that we go through in life, where we do worry about our loved ones. We do worry about these things, but we don't often talk about it. Do you find in your circle, in your friends, with your family, you talk about these things?
Absolutely. I mean, even over the last couple of years, we've had, you know, even things like COVID brings everything into deep focus. Like my uncle died of COVID. My both aunties got cancer in the middle of it because they never went and got help. Yeah. And the fragility of life becomes very clear to you. And then to watch your parents, so watch your mum and dad lose their brothers and sisters. And that really teaches you about life. It teaches you about the fragility and the importance of presence. That's the one thing I've learned more about my life. I always believe that the best way I can honor the people I love is by succeeding, by showing them how good I am at things. But actually the best way for me to honor them is to be present with them. And that's something I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah, that's a big lesson, isn't it? It's like when you feel like, okay, I need to show them, look, I do love you. And you might be out working all hours and then buying something and thinking this is love. But sometimes love for people is just you being there, you being present, you showing up in that way.
And I think in a world that, you know, robs you of your presence a lot and demands you not pay attention to anybody except what they're showing you, I actually think the greatest gift you can give the people you love is your presence. And that's difficult. That's not a lecture. I'm not saying I've figured it all out, but when I'm with them, I'm with them. I have these thing called Nokia Sundays, which I have this terrible Nokia phone that only 3 people have a number for. And that's the only phone I use on a Sunday. So we can say things, we can pretend, but say, well, I need my phone. You're talking yourself into that. You are actually convincing yourself otherwise.
Yeah. There's one thing that
your phone 24/7.
There's one thing that I really struggle. Oh, yeah. No, sorry. I think there was an overlap. Carry on.
Oh no. I'm just saying, if you think you need your phone 24 hours a day, there's something wrong here. You have to have the emotional intelligence to make a decision to say that this is not normal to be at the sacrifice of that all the time. And you will miss, I always say this, we become so busy chasing a life that we've ultimately missed living it. Even the bad stuff, even the complicated stuff that comes up that we all try to avoid. You need to live it. You got to live through it. And these are the things you learn in therapy.
Yeah. And there's something, I know that you're also a mindfulness teacher and you support people with mindfulness, but it's also something that you practice. Is that something that you have ended up falling into? And have you found that that's been a part of your journey in helping you to manage these different thoughts and to be more present?
Well, I think mindfulness, the biggest reason I didn't want to do my master's in it was because I thought it would affect my own personal practice. But actually it deepened it. It deepened my practice. My practice was slightly surface level. It was the thing that utterly changed my relationship with mindfulness was Buddhism. It was understanding the Buddhist philosophies and the ideologies and applying them to my practice. I think if you try to teach mindfulness without teaching the foundational elements of Buddhism, it's just mindfulness. It's mindfulness light. You're not giving people the true extent of what it means. So you shouldn't fear things like Buddhism. People do fear it. Because they immediately relate that to a religion, whereas there's no direct God in Buddhism. There's no deity. So they always say in Buddhism, you're your own truth.
Yeah.
And it's this type of stuff that, you know, I'm not a Buddhist, but I believe fundamentally in the ideology of Buddhism.
And I think that's it. Sometimes people are like, I don't want to do mindfulness because they're associated to a religion or they associate to something else. And they're like, but I don't want to be part of that. But it's not that. It's you're taking elements to help you support you. So how do you explain to people what mindfulness is?
So the definition, the psychological definition of mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment without judgment, which is a really bad definition. It doesn't really grab your attention. I always say to people, step into an ice cold shower, and the minute the water cuts the arse off you, tell me, are you thinking about yesterday or what you have to do tomorrow? It's presence. But the thing about
Yeah.
it is the non-judgment element of it is actually the most important thing. So you sit to practice to observe your thoughts, to observe your emotions and your feelings. And we've hardwired ourselves to become incredibly judgmental about everything, including ourselves. And what you need to really practice in mindfulness is when that mind of yours goes chaotic, which it will do, is to actually just not apply judgment to that. Just because that's what minds do. It's just busy mind, and it is what it is. It's that acceptance and non-judgment that is the crucial part of paying attention to the present moment. And I think when you learn those principles of practice, is what I call them, it changes your practice completely.
Do you feel like it's something that people will get better at the more that they practice, or do you feel like if you can do it or you can't do it?
Oh, you can do. I would fundamentally believe I can teach anyone how to find where it fits for them. So, for example, if somebody struggles, a lot of people with say panic disorder would struggle
Yeah.
a lot with focusing on the breath. It's just not something they want to do, and you work with them in a different way. So, like you, what I do is a pre-assessment. You need to know the context of this person's situation. Some people that we would have, in MBSR or mindfulness cognitive based therapy might have even been sexually abused. So things like body scans might be difficult for them to pay attention to their body.
Yeah.
So what we will say to them is just visualize your wedding day. Play your wedding day out in your head. Or a day that you just remember really fondly, and play it out really detailedly. Bring all your senses into it. Really allow, and that's mindfulness. It's present. But even Buddhism says you don't have to focus on the present moment. You need to focus the mind on something. And the other thing I think that's really powerful for young people, or people with anxiety or panic issues, is to use the senses. So really use your senses. So the one that really helps people to meditate is one thing you can smell, one thing you can see, one thing you can hear, and one thing you can feel, and just keep going through that. And what you're doing neurologically is you're settling the mind. You're getting out of the amygdala and you're getting into the neocortex, and you're settling the mind, you're settling the brain. So when people get that function, it's important you apply that context to them when it comes to mindfulness. Sometimes mindfulness is the single worst thing you can do with somebody. And I often just end up referring them to a psychologist.
But I really like the fact that you said right at the beginning there is that it's so mindful to be, or it's so important to be mindful of what have people gone through, because you might be forcing someone into something where close your eyes, do a body scan. But if they've been through trauma, they've been through childhood sexual abuse, or something has gone on in their life and you're getting them to do something here, are we really holding this space for them to get what they need, or are we re-traumatizing them? So it's so important to have that context of what's going on here, what's happening, and what am I asking this person to do, but what's my intention for this person doing this as well? Because it may have worked for me, it may have worked for someone else, but maybe it's not meant to work for this person.
And that's why we do the training that we do. That's why we had to do a 2-year master's. We have to understand, we're not psychotherapists, but we have to apply our pre-assessment like a psychotherapist. We have to look at the situation. We're not treating in that moment, but we're making a decision to say, actually, this is not the right thing for you to do. This 8-week program right now might be too intense for you. It could be somebody in grief, for example, but you have to make that call. So often for me, it is with mindfulness. And then you have people who are fine, and then something happens that shakes them in their practice. Because it's a group experience, you have to hold that room very, very wisely and contently, and you have to create that. And that's experience. You can't, I did group mindfulness and I absolutely hated it. I'm very socially awkward. I find big groups of people difficult. So I couldn't settle, but I actually ultimately ended up doing my MBSR I was lucky that I could do it just on my own with an individual, and it was life-changing.
You say, like, you're talking about mindfulness and you're talking about being like socially awkward. Like, have you always been like this? Would you say that you've been very conscious of your behaviors and your patterns?
Would I be? Yes, I'm like, so I think what I probably didn't say in mindfulness is the greatest thing it teaches you is self-awareness. It teaches you the way you interact with people, the way you communicate with people, the way you react to stressful situations. So it just gives you that, it keeps coming back to that. Maybe I should have used the Viktor Frankl definition. That's, to me, is the best definition of mindfulness. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your ability to choose, and that choice is your growth. To me, that's ultimately what it is. But then people will say things like, oh, does that mean you don't react? I went, no, you do. So a good example of that is I once, as a mindfulness teacher, people assume that you never lose your cool. And I lost my cool with somebody, and they went, "Oh, hold on a sec, I thought you're a mindfulness teacher." So no, I actually have to think about how much of a pain you're being. And I've
Yeah.
taken the space. And even after taking that space, I think you're completely out of order. So it's not
Yeah.
about not losing your cool. It's about not doing it
Yeah.
automatically
Yeah,
and
yeah.
creating that
It's
space.
even as a psychologist, people will say to us like, "How are you even a psychologist? You just said that," and I'm like, "I'm not your psychologist." Like, yeah, when I'm with someone and
Mm.
you're in that space, but you're also like, when you're away from that, it doesn't mean that you're a psychologist all the time. It's like you are also living life and experiencing life, and you have different dynamics and relationships away from being a psychologist. But your core and your values are always there. But I think it's you show up differently, but hold space differently, and just it's other people. Sometimes it's other people's expectations of you. So people will see you as being a mindful teacher and thinking, oh, but you should be like a monk sitting on
Mm.
the top of a mountain and you're always Zen. And I think that's sometimes a stigma that people hold about the profession that you're in.
Even psychologists, like you get this idea, like relationship psychologists, that they have perfect relationships. But I think what happens with, because my partner's a relationship psychologist, is when there is conflict, you know how to deal with it. You know
Yeah.
how to navigate it. It doesn't mean there won't be conflict. Conflict is normal. It's a normal part of
Yeah.
life. People do silly, stupid things. But how you react and deal with that conflict is what is when you see as psychologists being able to go, well, actually, and also what I found with a lot of people who are self-aware and emotionally intelligent is that their ego doesn't call all the shots all the time. They're
Yeah.
able to
Yeah.
actually go, you know what, I was out of order there. And you don't feel weird about that. You don't feel like you're going to crumble. You can admit it. And I think you get really comfortable with not having to be right all the time. And that is a lovely place to be.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's something really powerful of having self-awareness and being able to communicate your needs. So this is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on for me. This is what's happening, rather than blaming the other person. You made me feel like this, and you've done this, and that's why I'm feeling like this. Would you say that that's how you've been in previously, since before gaining like self-awareness? Would you say that you've been in that space?
I'm very interested in that space of kind of victimhood and looking for, other people. Like we had Edith Eager on the podcast a couple of months ago, and she said, I'm not a victim. I was victimized.
Yeah,
And when you
yeah,
actually do your digging into, when I do the digging into my own like psychology, I went to a very abusive primary school. We were badly physically abused by the teachers. I then moved to Israel. I was 13. My dad was in the United Nations, so I was in the midst of conflict for 6 months, and it was really, really overwhelming.
yeah,
And
of
the reason I
course.
say all that is that you start to realize that the way you're feeling is actually, so the way I adapted as a child really worked. It worked really well for
Mhm.
me. It got me through.
Yeah,
I cut myself off emotionally from the world. That was the best single way I could get through. And it worked well
yeah,
until I got to my adulthood and I started emotionally disconnecting from everything and everybody and every profession. And it doesn't work when you're an adult. You got to pull up your big boy
yeah,
pants and you got to, but unless you're aware of that's how you're acting. So that's where therapy came into it. It was just that idea of that being suggested to me. I remember my therapist saying, when I told him about the school, in my head, it was no big deal. I was
yeah,
like, oh,
yeah.
it was just, we were all beaten up. It was what happened. And he was like, no, no, stop now.
Mm.
And only then did I realize, you know, the truth. And it wasn't him digging. He was like, you were beaten up. You were a child. You were beaten up
Yeah.
by adults badly, consistently. We got it. We got to unlayer that. And
And
that's it.
also it's like you've experienced that. So in your head, it's like it's normalized.
Totally.
And in your head, it's like, yep, this is what is normal and this is what everyone went through. So you continue life in that way. And when you're continuing life in that way, you're saying, yeah, yeah, this is what's happened. But you've disassociated from all these emotions that you would have felt because that was your safety. In order for you to survive in that space, it's like I can't feel these emotions because I need to get through this. I'm going to be in this school. I need to continue, and no one else is doing anything. So everyone else is almost like doing the same thing. So you continue doing that. But it's only until you're having these conversations with people and they're like, that's not okay. What happened to you?
Mm,
And you're like, yeah, but I went through that, I experienced that, and this also happened. And you start to realize, hang on, there's so much more here, but that wasn't okay.
mm,
But it's not saying that you're a victim of that. It's saying that the things that you went through, you weren't okay, but it's saying now, come back to yourself, come back to these feelings that perhaps we have avoided, we have ignored, because otherwise we can keep repeating the patterns where we feel like this is okay, and then we in some ways have boundaries where things are not okay, but we think that they are okay because of what we've experienced.
But that they've become normalized. And I think
Yeah.
this is, I remember reading, around schema therapy, the idea that you seek out, if you had an, abusive parent, you seek it out in a partner because
Mhm.
it's what you
Yeah.
understand. It's what
Yeah.
you know how to navigate. You actually feel safer with somebody who treats you badly because you know what to do in the situation. I just found that really upsetting because it's like,
Yeah.
you know, everybody has such worth that they have to find themselves that just because somebody tried to take that from you, you think that that's all that you have. So I think in my
Yeah.
own case, I never had the kind of, I never blamed anybody else. And I had the privilege of that. Like I grew up in, a really beautiful part of Ireland. I have amazing parents. So I always had that stability and love that came from home. But, I often think about the people who didn't have that. So it's not about not, I feel lucky that I had all that in place. But the point about it, I'm saying, is around this idea of victimhood.
Mm.
I think it can be used as a weapon against other people, saying you can never question me because I was in a position of where I was, something happened to me. And like we said before, like without context you can't have those conversations. You
Yeah.
don't know the context of what actually happened to that individual, who did it. Was the other
Mm.
thing. I don't know if you know Lucy Johnson's work, Power Trip Meaning.
Mm. Yeah.
The idea of power dynamics is so important here. I'm 6'6". I'm a massive man. I don't physically fear most of my environment,
Yeah.
and I never have. But then when you add that into the equation, it becomes different. So these are things I think about a lot. Like,
Definitely.
I'm only speaking from my own perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. Like, and we keep going back to this idea of context, because when we're having a discussion about something, and this is why even in my work and in your work, is we need to go back and understand what's the story here, what's the narrative that this person is carrying, and it's trying to dive deeper and deeper into that to try and make sense of the person in front of you. So when you're working with individuals, it's, yeah, you can get someone to close their eyes, but if that's uncomfortable for them, that's why the pre-assessment is so
Mm.
important, because it's trying to give you context and trying to allow you to see a bigger picture rather than just going with what we see. But I often find that in the world that we live in, people are very much like, okay, this tunnel view. We don't look at the bigger picture. We're not there looking at the bigger picture.
No.
And people can come into therapy and it's like, yeah, but it is like this and it's like this. And people have always said this to me. And I'm like, but what's the bigger picture here? Let's try to understand. And when we start almost like closing the loop and making sense of things, it's almost like that's when we gain like this inner peace, because we start to realize, oh, it's not like this, or we start to make sense of the life and the story that we've had in our lives.
Totally. And I think the big thing that did that for me then was when they really bore in on my value system, like what you actually stand for. And I'd never been asked that before. I've been
Yeah.
asked that as part of teams, like what's the team stand for? What are your values? And you just shout out words that you just, because you wanted to get out of the meeting, you'd be like loyalty, honesty. But actually, when my therapist was so skilled that they never offered me anything. It was just constantly bringing me around to find all this stuff myself. And
Yeah.
actually, what became my main value system, my entire system, everything I do is based around one word, and that's family. It is literally at the
Mhm.
core of everything for me.
Yeah.
So he was like, the decisions you make, and need to have that at the core. If that's genuinely where your biggest value system lies, that's your starting point, and having that stability of knowing that. And it's a great place to be. And your value system might change, like something might
Yeah.
happen, but for me, I think it's very fundamentally, I exist to be part of my family, and to succeed and do all those other cool things that humans try to do, but ultimately to make my family feel that I'm utterly connected to them. That's the most important thing to me.
Yeah. And also, I was looking, and on your website, you have something that says about what you are about. So it's like you're a seeker and speaker of truth. So there's all these other things, there's all these other labels. So we have a speaker, a teacher, writer, thought leader, podcast host, philanthropist, musician, athlete, but most importantly, a seeker and speaker of truth. And I just thought that that was really powerful, because we can have all these little labels, but there's something really deeper here. And I wonder, like, are you able to elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah. So like I've always been deeply interested in the human condition and
Mm.
really uncovering all aspects of the human condition. And what that sounds like, it sounds like it's like, even by saying that out loud, I want to punch myself in the face. I am not an inspirational quote, fridge magnet philosophy, Tony Robbins B team person. I am not that. There's a beautiful Rumi quote that I use a lot, as opposed to these kinds of inspirational quotes. Words can bring you to the door, but they cannot bring you into the house. And this is
Mm.
the thing I have lived my life by, is
Yeah.
actually, when I say seeker of truth, when I look at mental health and people talk about mental health and they theorize on, what
Mm.
it is and why people feel the way they feel, we are no closer now than we were 200 years ago to understanding the human
Yeah.
mind. And we need to
Mm.
admit that. And for
Mm.
me, the seeker of truth is more the people that keep telling us that they've figured it out.
Yeah.
When you look at 200 years of mental health as a psychologist, as a sociologist is what I am and what I
Mm.
study. I look at 200 years of mental health intervention. I've seen people lobotomies. I've seen insulin coma therapy, malaria treatment, like brutal treatment of people
Yeah.
in the pursuit of figuring out what's wrong with them. And
Mm.
what I started to realize is that who gets to decide who is normal and who is not normal?
Yeah.
And these are the
Yeah.
things I started to figure out. So now 200 years later, we're looking at mental health going, still don't really know what it is, why people at times can lose their minds. And there's an arrogance to believe
Mm.
that we know how to solve that. And to me, the
Yeah.
seeker of truth in me is it's deeper than my PhD, is to look at why have we taken the word of the way it was called in its day, it was called madness or lunacy. Why have we taken that and decided as humans that we know what to do with it? And I think
Mm.
it's always been done out of positive intention. I always believe that the
Yeah.
people trying to treat it were trying to help, but I call it therapeutic desperation in some situations. And in Ireland, our history of institutionalization is our darkest part of
Yeah.
our history. So that's the seeker of truth. I've come to the conclusion that we don't know. We're no closer to understanding the human consciousness now than we were. And actually, the people we should be listening to are the philosophers and the Stoics, who all those years ago was like, listen, lads, I think I know what we're doing here. And somewhere down the line, science just got so believing that they can solve the problem. And science has never solved the problem here. And
Mm.
they struggle with that. And I think
Yeah.
that's something, that's the secret truth to me. And also, I'm not afraid to say that. I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
doing what I do and the work that I do, I set up charities. I believe that the best step that we can take to help people's fundamental mental health is early prevention and early intervention,
Mm.
helping children. So
Yeah.
that's my belief. I believe that I believe we live in a far better society for people who are struggling now because we're comfortable with
Mm.
people's pain and we can talk about it. But I think we need to stop numbing it. I mean, we got to teach people how to sit with it. And yeah, that's the seeker of truth in me. I don't have the answer. The PhD you're seeing behind me is trying to find it. That's the seeker in me. And I could do 5 years of this and come out and go, I'm nowhere closer.
Yeah. Did you choose your topic for the PhD, or was that given to you?
No, I decided that I wanted to look at Ireland's history of mental health intervention because it's such an interesting history. It is like
Yeah.
Ireland's
Yeah.
history,
Imagine.
such a tiny little country. We have like such a deep history of colonialism, famine, civil war, wars, deep poverty, like everything you can think of could happened in Ireland, the island of Ireland. So all of those social factors of mental health really feed in. How did Ireland react to the famine, stuff like that.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
when you look with a lens and you want to really understand mental health, and you look at the biggest contributor to mental health in Ireland has always been poverty. It's always had the
Yeah.
most pervasive. So I think what I'm trying to get at, it's a really long answer, is in the space of mental health, I believe we put so much emphasis on the individual
Yeah.
rather than kind of going, what surrounds that individual? What is their social situation? What is their family situation? And sometimes I think we have to look further afield. And I think international literature tells us that now, that the biomedical model hasn't come up with anything.
Introducing our exclusive newsletter, your weekly dose of inspiration, insights, and empowerment. Each week, we deliver curated content straight to your inbox. And this is designed to help you navigate life's challenges and thrive. Join our community of like-minded individuals who are committed to personal growth and self-discovery. Subscribe now to start your journey towards a happier, more fulfilling life. Don't miss out.
And it's had its
I think
time
it's so
now.
important. Yeah, I think the context, we keep talking about that. And even on your podcast, we've spoken about the context. That's really important. Not just looking at these are the symptoms. Okay, this is what this it's like. No, let's look at the bigger picture to try and make sense of what's going on rather than diagnosing and then medicating someone, because actually there's so much more here. It's like an iceberg. We see the tip of it, but there's so many other layers that we need to look at. But I also know that prior to you studying the PhD and also going or being very passionate about mindfulness, before this you were an athlete in your previous life. So talk me through that. What happened and what was the journey there?
I was a professional rugby player, played for Leinster, and I wasn't really a rugby player. There's a sport in Ireland called GAA, or Gaelic football, which is what I played. But I kind of just spurted up to 6'6" at the age of 15, and I was like, "You're going to play rugby because you're huge." But I struggled massively at that point. I spent most of my teenage years with kind of chronic panic disorder, a really crippling anxiety disorder. And this was in the 90s. Nobody was talking about it. My hero died, Kurt Cobain, and I asked the teacher what happened, and he called Kurt Cobain a coward. So that was what I was dealing with. But when I became a professional rugby player, that high-functioning anxiety that you talk about, that got me to that point, actually destroyed me. It destroyed me because you can't make excuses anymore. And then I lost my hair. My mental health became very physical. My body started to react. I started getting really chronically bad injuries. I'd never got an injury in my life. And that kind of translated to me not sleeping, self-medicating, not getting out of bed, and then had a pretty bad injury 2.5 years later, and I had to retire. And that was my, dream gone, because mentally I wasn't able to cope. So this is where a lot of my interest comes from. I always believed that my brain was broken. And when you tell yourself your brain is broken, you kind of go, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
And that's what I always believed.
Yeah. And even when you say that, like, okay, my brain was broken, did you feel like anyone's noticed what was going on for you?
My coach, I had in the podcast, Matt Williams, he was my coach at the time. I asked him, what did you think was wrong with me back then? And they thought I was an alcoholic, and they didn't care. So they saw the behavior, but they had a perception of what that behavior actually was. And I really respect him for saying that. Like, I really respect. He could have said anything else, but he saw somebody who just was disinterested, whereas I wasn't that at all. And I was taking Xanax before matches. It was just chaos, where I tried to manage it. But I think at that point, I had a real fear of insanity, actually. I had a real fear. I grew up close to a psychiatric hospital in Mullingar, and I always believed that if I tell people the truth, this is where it'll put me. So all of that fed into my thinking, and which is why I'm so interested in this area and why I'm so passionate about it. It was because, being told all your life that you've chemical imbalances and stuff, it just made me feel disempowered to actually figure out why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And I actually only, throughout my whole professional rugby career, I self-medicating, insomnia. It's not conducive to being a professional athlete.
It's interesting because you've said right now the word that you are really passionate about is the preventative. Because in that space, when you felt like, okay, my brain was broke, you didn't know any different. So in that moment, it's like, how am I going to get through this? So you found ways to cope. But other people would look at that thinking, oh, this is what this person is, and they've given you a narrative, but you have no idea. You don't know how to not or give yourself what you need. So in that space, it's like, right, you're continuing, trying to get through, but then you hit this brick wall, and it's like you have to stand up, but you can't. And that must have been really difficult, because your identity is, I am this rugby player, I'm this, and this is my dream, and this is everything I've been working for. And now you hit this brick wall, and it's almost like you have to stand up, but you're no longer this what you've been trying to work for? And I wonder how that felt for you.
Well, there were two moments in my life where I can I can say rather tragically that I felt I was losing my mind, where
Yeah.
it did feel incoherent and it felt
Mm.
scary. And it was that time, and when I moved to London when I was in my early 30s, and they're the only times I can fundamentally remember not knowing what was going on in my head and not being able to, and both of them were driven by insomnia. So
Mm.
serious sleep deprivation. You talk back to
Yeah.
this kind of
Mm.
high functioning anxiety, but it was just this hypervigilance of, and then I was taking every drug you could give me to try and knock myself out, and nothing was working. So then
Yeah.
I started taking other drugs that would give me energy just to get up to go there. So it was this kind of, so then obviously I'd say my brain was well and truly broken because I had so much medication going on, and I didn't know I was robbing scripts from
Of
doctors.
course.
Um, and you were justifying this behavior because the lesser of two evils was sleeping.
Mm.
So all of that stuff, there's a fundamentally terrifying moment where you're not sure how sane you feel, and
Yeah.
and that to me was things like, I remember I lived in London, and I lived in northwest London, just up by Chalk Farm there in Camden, and it was a beautiful summer's day, like the most beautiful day, one of those London days where it was just blue sky, it was boiling, it was humid, and I was walking up the hill, and it was like a massive cloud just went over the sun, and
Yeah.
it didn't. There was no cloud, and it felt
Mm.
like like I was hallucinating at this point. The whole street went dark. And that's when I kind of felt, right, this is not good. This is bad. And
Yeah.
and I started kind of having conversations with my family then.
Yeah, yeah. And it's almost like it got to that point where it's like, okay, this now I don't know what's going on. And it's good that you did go to your family at that point, because even then when people are high functioning, it's like I can't go to my family, I can't talk to my friends because people see me as being this person who's got it together, that has everything, that is a perfectionist. So for you to then go and speak to your family, that's a huge, huge decision. And I wonder what the motivator was. I know you said it's because you realized and you felt like this hallucination, but at the same time it's like you're going to your family and telling them, I don't know what's going on. And there's a real vulnerability to
I
that.
think I think when you do stuff like that, there is an element of it where you're tipping your toe in the water. You're not coming in and going, I'm losing my mind. It's just kind of like, I'm having a tough time. Would be kind of the starting point
Yeah.
you'd have, or
Yeah.
it feels like my skin crawls all the time. There was safe ways of saying things that didn't, make them go, oh my God, there's something really wrong with you here. And like, so that was always what I did. It was always this
Yeah.
safe space of never telling people too much. And actually it was ultimately telling my doctor. I told my doctor, GP,
Mm.
once, and it was like, it was a purge. And at that
Yeah.
point I expected to be committed. Like I was like, I really was, and I'm not in any way um kind of diminishing what I went through, but there was that kind of element of desperation at that point. And I was
Yeah.
very lucky that my GP was just incredible, was just so assuring, uh, told me, or, you're not losing your mind, you're perfectly okay. Listen to this conversation. And then my therapist that I ended up getting, when I told him everything, his first line was like, how could you be any other way? And that was hugely relieving to hear. So all
Mm.
of this stuff,
Why was that? Why was that relieving at that point to hear that? What do you think that gave you in that
it
moment?
gave me the idea that, like, when he said that, it was just kind of like everything I'd gone through, I'd normalized and pretended it was completely
Mm.
normal, and that any normal human being should have been completely able to function with that. And if I'm not, I'm just weak and whingy and playing the victim. And then when I said it out loud and he heard it in kind of chronological order, you could see it, and I'm going, oh my God, there's an awful lot of intensity here. And it was him kind of going, that is a lot. That is a lot. Even he was getting overwhelmed with the amount of information I was telling him. So this type of stuff
Yeah.
is kind of, it's a relief to know that, you aren't that thing. You're not that person who's fallen apart. And you're not broken.
Yeah.
You're just human. And these are the things you learn about yourself. When just because something I've experienced doesn't sound stressful to another person doesn't mean it's not stressful.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so subjective, and I've always taken that order. So I think that's something I've learned in the depths of all of this. And I think I look back of that moment, and somebody who's researching Irish institutions for the last 200 years, and I know right well where I would have ended up if the truth be known, and there was nothing wrong with me. This is the point. I think that's why I'm so, there are people who are absolutely very, very mentally unwell. We know that, absolutely. But my question is, does that happen overnight? Is it, often people who end up repressing or internalizing experiences and pain for so long, that maybe turns into addiction, that turns into other elements. And maybe we need to create a society that holds that with more kindness than immediately pathologizes it and puts a label on it.
And I think it's also a lot about raising awareness into the signs of, okay, these are the signs that you might be having when you are feeling like burnout or when you are feeling anxious. Because I often find a lot of people that are high functioning anxiety, for example, they're in this pathway because they think that that's what's expected of them, and they don't know that they're stressed out. They don't realize that this is stress, this is anxiety. I thought everyone has this, or I thought everyone does it this way. And I'm like, no, this is not something that everyone does. It's something that we do because of this. And when we look at your story, it makes sense to why you do present in this way. And they're like, I never thought of it like that. But it's, how do we get people to come into this space and start to work and start to understand what's going on for them? If they feel like, well, there's nothing wrong with me, like everyone's like this. What are some of the signs that you would say, the early signs of people, just for them to get support?
The question I ask people sometimes is like, ask yourself honestly, do you know what it feels like to be calm? That's just a starting point. And that complete calm, or the body and the mind and the spiritual rest, just kicks in, and you feel it, maybe it was a holiday or something, but asking somebody who's high functioning anxiety, do you know what it feels like to feel that space of utter calmness? And most of them will say, no, I don't even know what it feels
or
like.
even just, and that even just to just stop, like they don't know what it feels like to stop because they're on this hamster wheel, and like the next thing, that's what they've learned to do, is on to the next thing, on to the next thing. They haven't learned to just sit with themselves.
Yeah, and I think if you admit, if your answer to the question that you don't know what it feels like to be calm, you then need to make the accept that is not a normal way to live a life, because the central nervous system needs both. It needs those parasympathetic moments of, okay, I'm with someone I love, I'm completely safe, I'm completely at ease, I'm just taking life, and whatever that moment might be. It could be a holiday, it could be watching TV, it doesn't matter. But it's just somebody like with seriously high functioning anxiety. So in mindfulness, we call it automatic pilot. You put yourself in automatic pilot. And ultimately, you're moving so fast that you don't even know what stresses you anymore. You don't even know what it is, what is causing this. And the problem with most high functioning anxious people is they're also really good at being high functioning anxiety. They deliver. They have the ability. And I often think in my own case, there was no warning shot. It was just go, breakdown. And it was just burnout. It was like, bang, hit a wall, didn't want to eat, didn't want to talk, didn't want to be around people. And I think it is because we have the ability to drive ourselves into the ground that we often do it. And, I think that's the first question people need to ask is, I know what it feels like to be calm now. I know what it feels like to be comfortable in my skin. I know what it feels like where I don't owe the world anything. And there are days in my life where I absolutely, every single week, I take a full rest day. No matter what deadlines I have.
Yeah. And this is learning, isn't it? It's you learning to understand what is it that I need in my life. So having that rest day is important for processing. It's important just to have that time out, to, again, having boundaries with like your phone and things like that. Because otherwise there's so much information that comes in from so many different sources in life. And it's so important to have that time where it's like, okay, I need to also disconnect, and I need to give myself what I need. So for you, would you say your rest day, your mindfulness, do you think that those are the most important factors for you in keeping yourself sort of sane?
Yes, but I also think what happens, some people with rest days, and everyone's the same thing, subjective. Some people find playing golf restful. Some people, find doing nothing restful. But I do find the thing to watch in those moments is, I have friends who go, I took a rest day and I read, and all they read were self-help books that were telling them that they weren't good enough at something and they should be better versions of themselves. And I'm like, no. So what you need is spiritual rest. And spiritual rest is, to me, so spiritual, physical, and mental rest are three types of rest. Spiritual
Yeah.
rest is being around good people. That's
Mm.
your, like, who charges you, like, who maybe is if you're like me, I like my own company, so sometimes it's just being on my own and not needing to save the world. But ultimately, spiritual rest is probably the most important part. Don't
Yeah.
try to be a better person, and don't try to find ways to improve in those moments. And I think there's enough of that going on for you. And this
Mm.
isn't a lecture, by the way, because I haven't figured that out either. But I do think it's important that in a world that keeps using words like optimal for every single thing we do, humans aren't optimal. We're not optimal. And when you are optimal, and this is something people need to hear, especially if you do want to be ambitious and you want to drive and you want to be successful. If you want to be optimal, you can only be optimal for small windows of time. We
Yeah.
know that. So
Mm.
aim for something, aim for a goal. So I want to be optimal for this 3 week period because I have something on. And then I'm going to let myself crash a little bit, because you will crash. That's normal. And then I'm going to maybe rebuild again. It won't be so intense. But when you try to be optimal 12 months a year, you will burn out. Your body will give up on you.
Yeah.
You'll mentally have no interest. You'll spiritually have no interest. So being optimal is great for small periods of time.
Mm.
It's awful 12 months a year.
Yeah. And I see that. I see like people where they will say, well, I've had a rest because I've been hospitalized. That was my rest now. So now I'm going to come back out and I'm going to do, and I'll be like,
Oh,
right, okay, let's talk about this. Let's just try to understand what's going on. But it's the guilt that comes up. Like people find that productivity guilt that they need to be switched on all times of the day. They need to be productive. And if they haven't been productive or they haven't got through the things that they thought that they were going to get through, they beat themselves up. They say that they're not a good enough person. So their productivity
oh.
comes from like ticking off these things rather than actually, you know what, I've taken some rest. I've had space away from people today because that's what I need to just feel refueled. And it's really sad. It is really sad that this is how people live.
Eh, but we've normalized this way of living. This isn't
Yeah.
always the way
Yeah.
we've lived. It wasn't the way we lived in the 90s. It was absolutely, even the early 90s, this was not how we lived. I always joke about Ireland, like, when we were religious, you weren't allowed to do anything on Sunday. Like, Sunday was it, you go to mass,
Yeah. Rest.
rest day. And now I'm not saying bring back going to mass. All I'm saying is maybe we should bring back the normalization of
Mm.
having a rest day where it is unacceptable to be contacted by work and stuff like this. So when people say this is just the way it is, it isn't. This isn't. We've
Mm.
created this. This is neoliberal. This is driven by,
Yeah.
without getting political, by kind of Thatcher politics. That Thatcher believed depression was because you didn't work hard enough. She didn't believe that maybe the
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of people who lost their jobs, that had anything to do with the fact that So she brought this mindset to politics, and this mindset has
Mm.
filtered into how we work. It's not just her.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan did it too, and it's filtered into how we work, how we think, and then technology has put that on steroids. And we
Yeah.
are now in a position where we think it's normal that we work 7 days a week and that people can contact us
Yeah.
anytime we want, and it is abnormal. And Darwin himself come back from his grave and shout at us and say, "What are we doing?" Because it's not survival of the fittest; it's now survival of the stupidest, and that's where we're going. And
Really,
you,
very
yeah,
powerful.
and I think
Really
it's not
powerful.
normal. And if you're listening to
Yeah.
this and you are utterly rinsed and exhausted by the way you have to work, hear me when I tell you this isn't normal. And it isn't because you're weak or you need resilience training.
Mm.
It's because we've created this and
Yeah.
we need some leadership to change it. But don't beat yourself up about it. Don't think you need to be a better version of yourself. Don't think you need to go for a week resilience training. You need to allow yourself understand that this is chaos. And,
Yeah.
and and also a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun in the midst of it all. It's not all bad, but our way of working has been Americanized. It has been
Mm.
neoliberalized, and it is chaotic. And the other thing that's changed is that most of the way you used to work used to be kind of, so my background's economics. That's why I'm talking like a economist, but the most of the way we used to work was kind of service industry. It was manufacturing. There was purpose. Now it's completely moved, to service industry. We used to be manufacturing. And a lot of people are also going, I don't know my role here. What place? And now we have AI, and people are going, do I have a job in 3 years? So all of this feeds into the mental health of our nations. And we start to wonder,
Yeah.
what we're doing, how we're doing it. And I go back to the 80s, which were not perfect. But my God, they were better than this. Better music and better films as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, music as well. And also when we're looking at and trying to understand, okay, we're trying to live day to day, but then we also are reading all these different self-help books. We're also then looking online at like scrolling on different social media platforms and looking at everyone else. And we then create this narrative like, oh, this person's doing this, or this person was awake at this time, or this person's doing this, or this is what this book tells me to do. And we can get so lost in that as well because we think that we should be doing all these different things to be successful, to be productive. And if we're not, we think, oh, I'm not going to be like that then, or I'm not going to get to where they are. But it's also this narrative that we tell ourselves. And I think it is about not living so like focused on, okay, I need to be all these different things to get to this. I think it's being more intentional with what is it that I want in life? Where is it that I'm going? What is it that feels right for me rather than getting lost with everything else?
Well, I can say this, especially if there's young people listening to this who
Yeah.
get that messaging and buy into it. I've been lucky enough in the work that I do. I've worked with world class, I mean, some of the best athletes in the world. I've worked with an array of musicians who are, you know, highly successful, touring, high profile musicians. I've worked with business people, and every single one of them have figured out how to rest. Every single one of them realized that that's the most important component of their week. And the guys who go on TikTok and tell you that they've done 2 days work before 6 a.m. and gone to the gym 3 times before 8 a.m. and injected green stuff into their testicles at 9 a.m. It is nonsense. It is nonsense. It's unsustainable. It is 15-second TikTok bullshit. Really successful people, the people you look up to and you want to admire and you want to be, know how to rest, and they know how to allow themselves connect with other people. And those that don't are just completely miserable. And I
Yeah.
mean, some of the athletes that I've worked with, both individual athletes and team athletes,
Mm.
it's non-negotiable. It's just part. It's built into the
Mm.
program. And see, it's a good example here is to use when you're a professional athlete, you get your week,
Mm.
and your week is completely framed for you. And there's one day in that week that says R&R, rest and recovery. And the reason rest and recovery is so important is because all that hard work you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the muscle building, strengthening the body, getting more powerful, more skillful. The only way you can actually get dividends from that is to rest so the body can repair so you
Mm.
can go again.
Yeah.
And what's
Yeah.
happening is we're not doing that. We're not mentally or physically resting. So our bodies are not replenishing, they're not repairing. And then we're taking like drinks that give us energy to keep up with the pace of the world, drugs to keep because we're so tired. Because the human body, back to Darwinism, is not designed to do what it is now expected to do. And that is
Yeah.
why you're
Yeah.
seeing people completely exhausted and rinsed and anxious. And then what happens,
Mm.
you know more than anybody, when you become hypervigilant, when you need sleep the most, you
Mm.
can't sleep. And that's the
Yeah.
vicious circle that we're creating. And it needs leadership. It needs political leadership, but it needs kind of corporate and business leadership now to change that. And some people are doing it.
Do you think that's what the answer is to change this? Because the biggest things that I see is loneliness, burnout, anxiety, and these are like detrimental to our physical health as well. But what do you think that's the answer is the leadership side and that being sort of as a ripple effect and a hierarchy down and feeding that to everyone else that it's okay to look after yourself?
Well, yeah, when you look at the kind of 5 biggest companies in the world, pretty much the corporate landscape reacts to how they function. So you look at your
Yeah.
Microsofts, your Apples, and then maybe your kind of JP Morgans, massive organizations. And I'm completely idealistic and romantic by saying this. I know I am, but the influence and power they have to reorganize. There's a guy called Adam Grant, an amazing organizational psychologist, who talks
Yeah.
about how this can be done and how it actually will economically, financially benefit any organization that does it. But then when you go look at a political situation, like, you know, when I look over the UK and I look over at America, and don't get me wrong, Irish politics is not great either. And I went, these are the people that we expect to lead us in a better way. These are the people we expect to actually stand up and do the right thing for society. These people I wouldn't allow run a schoolyard, genuinely. Like you look, you know, and I was listening to Liz Truss today on a podcast, and I was thinking, how have we got here? And in America,
Yeah.
we have Joe Biden and Donald Trump. There are choices. So yeah, I think what's happened now is that the corporate world leads the world, and I think leadership is a big. It starts in communities, but the
Mm,
corporate influence is massive. Like in Ireland, like our
yes.
corporate, our whole country is run by three corporate companies. Or like I think about 60% of our GDP is from our corporate tax, from Apple, Google, and I think either LinkedIn but they're all here. So it's the way we
Yeah.
work. It's not normal, and it's not designed
Mm.
for humans, because the most you talk about loneliness, you talk about all of these different things
Disconnection, yeah, and it's us almost like fueling high functioning anxiety.
completely.
All of this is that this workaholic way of being. I need to keep going, 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 and it's like we're forgetting how to be. We're forgetting how to be a human being. We're becoming human
And we've
doings,
no
just like
communities
constantly
anymore.
going.
So
But
so you look
that's
at Emil
impacting
Durkheim's
us. Yeah,
so
yeah,
Emil Durkheim's theory of suicide, which is one of the most important sociological pieces ever written, our theories, said that the biggest contributor to suicide when he was kind of individualism. Was like he said, so it was between Catholics and Protestants. Protestants generally had a higher suicide rate because they were so driven by success, by individualism, every man, everyone for
mm,
themselves. Whereas Catholics were more community driven. They used each other, so they had lowered. So that was the theory, and I mean it's a
yeah,
loose enough theory. But if you look at how now as we progress, things like community is being devalued towards individualism.
yeah,
That's what we have to get to the crux of why people are more lonely. It's not because there's less
mm,
people in the world. There's a reason for this. I think as our value systems have changed to valuing
yeah,
individualism and business and success and entrepreneurism, and having very little value for community and connection. And ultimately, I don't know where I'd be in my life without it. It's all I need.
mhm.
Genuinely, I can succeed when I've good people around me and I'm in a good environment.
It's what people are yearning for.
Oh,
Ultimately, that's what we're wanting, is to be seen, to be heard, to be cared for, to be loved. And at the same time, we're not allowing that because we're so busy just go, go, go into on this sort of treadmill that doesn't give us what we're looking for. But we're told this is what's going to make you happy. This is what's going to give you success. And this is the right path. But you go down that path, and just like you've done, you hit that brick wall. Just like I've done, like people that I've worked with, you hit that brick wall, and then you stand up and you realize that wasn't the right path for me. But there's been so much wisdom in
mm,
that, so much learning in that. But it's, don't get to that place until you hit that brick wall. Start looking right now and start understanding and making sense of what are some of the patterns, what are some of the signs, be more curious with what's going on for you. And you've given some really great tips for youngsters to really look at themselves and start to ask even the simple question like, what does it feel like to be sort of like not doing anything, or to sit in calm? What does that feel like? Can I do that? And just a simple thing like that just gives so much more insight into what's going on here for me and how am I showing up in my life, and is
yeah.
this something that is beneficial for my mental health, my mental well-being, my physical well-being, my spiritual well-being, because all of these are ultimately what we're here for, isn't it?
Yeah, and I say that young people anyone listening to this, anyone who starts to tell you that they've all this figured out, it's just not true. We're all kind of just trying to figure it all
Sure.
out. There genuinely is no manual for this, and I think
Yeah,
it's important to recognize that is that let yourself fall apart a little bit. That's the one thing I had to learn,
mm,
is to let myself
yeah,
fall apart. And there's a beautiful line from um, a very one of the top rugby players in the world right now, like also one of the most physically imposing individuals I've ever seen in my entire life in real life. And he said something that really blew my mind. He
mm,
said, "You can be powerful and vulnerable at the same time," and I
yeah,
never forget it, because, like,
mm,
anybody who went into a room with him would be intimidated by just the sheer size and strength and character of this individual. But he's still able to go, yeah, my mum died when I was 13. I never was able to
yeah,
deal with it. It affected me all my life. It still affects me. There's still days I cry before
mm,
matches because I think of her. And you're just going, that's what young people need to hear. That's
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the reality of being human. Because that's me. I'm also powerful and
mm,
strong, and I'm effective, but I'm also
yeah,
very vulnerable, and I fall apart from time to time. And
yeah,
anyone who says don't do that, don't listen to them. It's just not. It's not true. You're not weak. You're just a big messy human being like me. And the words of Leonard Cohen, "There's a crack in everything." That's how the light gets in.
I think that's beautiful. It's beautiful, beautifully said, because that's what people need to hear. Not, right, get up in the morning, get up at 5 a.m. and do this and do this. It's like, no, like, be yourself. If you are someone who is feeling something, share it, like, discuss it, talk about it, not ignore it and pretend it's not there. It's like trying to address the elephant in the room.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So before we end, I always end the podcast by asking a question, and you have no idea what this question is. But the question is, do you feel that life is fair?
Oh my God. Can I ask, is that fair generally or fair to me?
Fair to you.
Yeah.
Or fair generally, actually. Which one would you prefer to answer?
Well, I can only really speak for me. Life has been incredibly fair to me. And I have been, I always say, for every act of horror, there's a million acts of love. And for everyone that has knocked me a million, have tried to pick me up. And that's the world I live in. So I've been very lucky. I feel a lot. I feel everything, which is probably makes me quite reflective. But I'm well aware of how lucky I am. And that doesn't mean that life isn't unfair sometimes. It's just, life is not a straight line. But I definitely believe, and in general, do I think life is fair? I think we have deep inequality and inequity in the world. And I think we can't wish it away. And we first thing, like the human existence, we got to recognize it exists. And we got to recognize that inequality and equity is probably the greatest contributor to our collective mental unwellness. And my good friend, Dr. Paul Dalton, has always said, equality is the best form of therapy. And I think it's a really good way of looking at it.
I really like that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing so much wisdom on this podcast. I appreciate it. And I know it's going to help, and people will take what they need from that.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Hey there. Are you ready to take your personal growth journey to the next level? I'm really excited to announce that my new online course is finally here. And in this course, we deep dive into topics we explore on this podcast, but with even more in-depth lessons, practical exercises, and personalized guidance. Don't miss out on this opportunity to invest in yourself and unlock your full potential. Enroll now and join me on this life-changing journey.